going to require the user to provide the owner ID. Instead, what we're actually going to do is we're going to let the logic of our route to actually just grab the ID from the token and then use that as the field. So we don't actually need the user to pass that into the body. So we're not going to use that field or apply that field to either one of these classes. We're just going to do it for the post class, which is the one that's responsible for sending the post out. So I'll add a column here and we'll call it owner ID. And I'm going to say that this is going to be a type of int. All right, let's save that and let's see if that makes a difference. So let's hit send. And so now we can see that we get the owner ID. And that's really all the changes we have to make. So if we actually go to get one post and we look at our code here, and if you look at the post.py, for getting an individual post, you can see that we're returning the same exact model. And if we take a look at creating a post, we return the same model. So all of those will be updated accordingly. And same thing with the update post. The update post also uses schemas.post. So since we're using the same schema for all of them, we don't have to do anything else. And we could just quickly test that out. So I'll do get one post. And I realized we have to actually get, what was the ID? ID is 4. So we're going to update this to be an ID of 4. You can see that we now have the owner ID there. If we update it, right, we can once again get the owner ID. And at that point, it looks like everything else is good. However, if we go to create posts real quick, and we create a post, right, we get a crash actually. So there is an issue with creating a post, and I'm sure you guys can guess exactly what it is. Take a look at the error when we try to create a post. Right, it's saying there's some kind of SQL error, and it says there's a null value in column owner ID. And that makes sense. So we'll actually tackle this in the next video, and you'll see that it's going to be pretty straightforward to actually get that resolved. So in the last video, we learned that the create post functionality is broken now, because if I try to create a post, you can see that it sends back a 500 status code. And if we take a look at the logs, we can see that it looks like there's some issue with the SQL, and it's saying that the null value in column owner ID violates the not null constraint. And so looking at our model, we obviously set the owner ID right here. And this is set to be nullable false. So we actually have to provide who the owner ID is for this new post. So how do we do that? Well, let's go to our post path operation, and let's go to the create post path operation. And so it's right here. And so nowhere in this code are we actually providing a user ID or owner ID into this new post that we're creating. We're just grabbing the post, which comes from post create, the schema. And if we look at that schema, you can see that we do not provide a owner ID. And like I said, we're not going to actually pass the owner ID in the body. What we're going to do is whoever is logged in and creating the post should automatically be the owner, right? If you're logged into Twitter and you post something, Twitter knows that you're the one creating the post. So whatever ID is associated with your account, it's going to set that automatically. So we shouldn't have to pass that in the body. We should automatically retrieve it from your authentication status. So within post, right, you can see that we have the current user. And so we should be able to get the current user or the user's ID. So if I do current_user.id, and we can remove this, I don't need the email. And if I try to create a post, it's still going to error out. That's okay. I just want to see what it prints out, though, before the error. And you can see we got a lot of errors. That's okay. And you can see that it printed out the ID of my user, which is 23. And just to double check that that's actually my user, I'm going to select star from users. And you can see that 23 is Sanjeev@Gmail. So we could just take that and just add that into the new post object. And so we're creating the new post right here where we reference models.post. And what we're doing is we're just spreading out the schema that we got from the body. And so to actually add the ID property, it's very easy. All we have to do is just say owner_ID is going to be set to current_user.id. So we're just grabbing that from the getCurrentUser function, just like we did right here. And I think we probably need a comma there. And that should be all that we have to do. So I'm going to remove this code. And let's test this out now. So if I do create post, look at that. No errors. You can see that the owner ID was automatically set to the ID of my user, which is 23. Currently in our application, we do have authentication set up for delete post and update post. However, there's no check to make sure that a user is only deleting his own posts. Right now, if you're logged in, you can delete anyone's posts. And no application works like that. You should only be able to delete your own post. No user should be able to come in and delete one of my posts. That doesn't make sense. So let's implement the logic for setting up a quick little just if statement just to check, hey, is the person that's logged in trying to delete a post that he owns? If he doesn't, then we're going to return an error. And so right now, if you take a look at our delete post path operation function, we query the post that he's trying to delete, and we check to see if there's no post. If there's no post, then we send a 404, that's expected. But if we did find a post, the next check is just going to be another simple if statement. And we're going to say if post.owner underscore ID does not equal get current user dot ID. So these two things have to match for the user to be able to delete it. If they don't match, then we're going to send another HTTP exception. So we'll say raise HTTP exception. Now the exception, we'll set the status code to be a new one. So this one's going to be a 403. So this means forbidden. That means it's a resource that they specifically aren't able to access, because we could send a 401, but they are, I guess a 401 could also work, but I'm going to do 403. I think that makes more sense. And then we can set the detail. And I'm just going to say not authorized to perform requested action. And this exact same check can be used for updating posts as well, because it's the same exact logic. And I'll just do that right here, right under the same check. So same logic, right? First thing we're going to do is we're going to check to see if that post exists. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the owner of the post is whoever the user is logged in as. Now let's test this out. So right now, if I do a get posts, you can see that the owner, okay, so we've got a post created by both owners. And I'm currently logged in as, I actually can't remember who I'm logged in as, but we can see that I used Sanjeev at Gmail, and that's going to be user 23. And what I'm going to do is go back to get posts, and I'm going to try to delete the post with an ID of 4, because that's the owner ID of 21. And keep in mind, right now I'm logged in as user 23. So let's try this. We're going to delete post with an ID of 4. Okay, it's already set there. So we should get an error in this case. And it looks like I got a server error. That's a problem. And I already see the issue. And right now, post is actually not the post itself, it's the query. And to actually get a post, I have to do post.first1. So what I'm going to do actually is I could change this to post.first and then grab the owner ID, but I'm going to actually perform the query right here. I'll say post. Actually, I'll change this to post underscore query. I'm going to make a few changes actually. And I'm going to set this to be post equals post underscore query dot first. And then I'm going to set this to be post. And this is going to be set to query. All right, and just to kind of quickly recap, we define the query here. We'll then find this post. We'll check to see if it's not there. And then we'll check to see if the owner is, if the user who's logged in actually owns this post. And then we're going to grab the original query, and then we're just going to append a delete so that we delete it. That's all. And let's just make sure the update is set up the same way. And it looks like the update one was already working that way, so it should be good to go now. Hopefully there's no errors. And let's try this. And once again, we got an error. And it looks like function object has no attribute ID. And I realized my mistake again. First of all, this is getting stored as current user, not get current user. So we need to change this to be current user. I'm not sure why I did it like that. It seems pretty goofy. And then this also should be current user, right? Because we're calling that function and we're storing the result in current user. So we want to reference the variable. I'm not sure if that was like an autocomplete that did that, or I just had a brain fart. Either way, hopefully it's the last of our issues. So let's try this. All right, perfect. Look at that. Not authorized to perform that requested action. That's to be expected because we don't own that post. However, if I do a quick search again, I do own the post with an ID of 8 because we can see the owner ID is 23 and that's who I'm logged in as. So let's try to delete post with the value of 8. Send. And we get a 204, so that means it's successfully deleted. We'll do get post just to verify. And we can see that we get those, just the one post now. So that seems to be working. I'm going to go back in. Actually, let me create a post real quick because I no longer have a post. All right, so we created a new post. And so you can see that this is my post right here. And I'm going to just update it. So let's go to the update one. First of all, I'm going to try to update a post that I don't own. So we're going to try to update the post with an ID of 4. We should get a not authorized. And then let's grab the ID of the post that we do want to change, which is 9. Let's hit send. And it looks like it updated a little bit. Let's check our database always. So we'll say select star from posts. And the post with the 9 got the updated entry. Oh, wait a minute. It looks like it may have updated both of them. Only one way to find out if that's actually what's happening. I'm just going to create a quick new post. I'm just going to set the ID to be 23. All right, and I'm going to update post with 9 with an ID of 9. Okay, and then let's refresh this. Okay, so post with an ID of 10 is still the same. So, okay, it wasn't a bug. It looks like maybe I had changed this earlier. And I'm not exactly sure why when I updated this post, but that's okay. And so I think that's going to wrap up this video. We've handled the update and delete so that we can only update and delete our own posts. All right, before we proceed any further, I do want to talk about one last thing. And that is that when we do get posts, which is an authenticated route, so it requires you to be logged in to retrieve the posts. If I try to retrieve the post, you'll see I get posts from every user. Now, this may or may not be the result that you want, right? It's going to depend on what your application is going to look like. If this is like a note-taking app or something where all of your posts and things like that are all private, then you wouldn't want to return everyone else's posts. You'd only want to return the user's specific post. However, if this is some kind of social media app, right, then obviously your posts are public. So when you do get post, you would want to return everyone's posts. And so it really just comes down to how you want your app to function. I'm going to show you guys what you would need to change if you wanted to make it so that you returned only your own posts. But afterwards, we're going to actually delete those changes because I want to leave my app like this. This is kind of how I wanted it to work, more like a social media app. But I do want to make sure that you guys understood how to make this change. And the same thing would go for get one post. We want to make sure that only the user that created a post can retrieve that specific post. And so if we go back to our path operation for getting all posts, you could see that we just do a db.query.all. And so if you only want to return the posts for a specific user that's logged in, it's very simple. All we have to do is do a filter. And here we'll say models.post.id equals, and then we just get the current user's ID. And it looks like I still left this as user ID, so this should actually be updated to be current_user. And if you notice, you can see that the type is set to int, even though it's actually returning an entire user object. I found that whatever type you put here doesn't actually impact the code. So put whatever you want. You can put in some sort of dictionary that actually correctly matches it, but you could just leave it as well. So I'm just going to leave it like that. It doesn't break any logic. And then at this point, I believe I'm still logged in as user 23. If I try to retrieve all posts, looks like I got nothing. And that could be a little bit of a problem. So let's see what we broke. And the easiest way to kind of troubleshoot this is what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove the .all. So that's going to return the query. It just won't actually run the query. And I'm just going to print the query. Let's see what that looks like. Sometimes it helps to see the raw SQL. So let's hit send. All right, we should get an internal server error. That's to be expected. But I just want to see my print statement. All right, so let's see our print statement. So select, we're getting all of the columns. That's expected from posts where posts ID equals this value. So that looks like it's perfect. Well, let's just quickly see before we move any further, what exactly is my user ID? And we'll just check our database. Okay, and we'll run this again. And then we're going to check. All right, so 23. And then if we go to our database, and I realized the exact mistake that I made, and this is a stupid mistake, right? This is looking for a post with an ID, with this specific ID. We don't want the ID of the post. We want the owner ID. So we'll do owner underscore ID equals current user ID. All right, let's test this out now. Once again, an error, but I just realized I forgot to update this to be .all. And then we'll try this again. And now we get all the posts with an ID of 23. If I log in as a different user, let's say this is Sanjeev1, I'll log in. That should update the token. So now if I do a get all posts, it should return all posts with an ID of 21. And so that's how that works. And then if you want to see how that looks like for retrieving an individual post, we'll go to get underscore post. And to actually handle this logic, it's going to be the same thing as a delete. So you can just copy what we did for the delete one. And here I can just say post.owner. And this should do the same exact thing. So now if I do get one post, well, first of all, let's take a look at all of our posts. Actually, I'm going to do it in our database. So I'm logged in as user 21. So I should be able to access a post with 4, but I can't access a post with an ID of 10. So let's try 10. Am I able to access him? Not authorized. Let's try ID of 4. And I can get that one. So that's how that works. But like I said, I don't want my application to work like that. So I'm going to remove that functionality. I'm going to make all posts essentially public. And then we're going to remove this filter. And I'll remove this print statement and this print statement just to clean things up a bit. And let's just double check that we didn't break anything once again. So let's get all posts. We get all posts. And let's get an individual post regardless of who owns it. And that's all fine and dandy now. Now, just kind of thinking ahead of what our front end would look like, even though we're not going to build it, taking a look at any social media type application, when we retrieve the posts, we usually want to embed the user's ID. So we want to know who actually created the specific post. We wouldn't just put the owner ID because none of your users understand that ID. They want to see what is your Twitter handle, what is your email, whoever created that. We want to see their user ID. So it looks like for all of the posts that we retrieve, we would have to then send a second query to retrieve, hey, what is the information for user with an ID of 23? And then once we get that, we would then have to kind of combine all that data so that we can figure out what post it belongs to what user and what is their specific username. Now with SQL Alchemy, we can kind of set it up so that it automatically does this for us. And so if we actually go to our models, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a relationship. And so this relationship isn't a foreign key. It does nothing in the database whatsoever. But what it does is it'll tell SQL Alchemy to automatically fetch some piece of information based off of the relationship. And so here I could say, we'll create a owner. And I'm going to say owner equals relationship. And we probably have to import this. And so it did. So it imported relationship from SQLAlchemy.orm. And so if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that. And what we'll say is, this is going to return the class of another model. So here I want to return the user. And this is going to be a capital U because I'm not referencing the table. I'm referencing the actual SQL Alchemy class. So what this is going to do for us automatically is that it's going to create another property for our post so that when we retrieve a post, it's going to return a owner property. And what it's going to do is it's going to figure out the relationship to user. So it's going to actually fetch the user based off of the owner ID and return that for us. And there's nothing else we have to do. It actually is that simple. This is one of the great parts about SQL Alchemy is that these relationships will automatically make it so that it fetches that data for us so that we don't have to manually do it ourselves. So let's test this out. Let's see if this actually works. I'm going to go back and I'm going to retrieve all posts. And it looks like nothing's changed. We don't get any user information. We do, once again, just get the owner ID. So what happened? Well, you probably can guess we need to update our schema. And so if we go to our post, we're now going to return a user. And so here, what we would do is we would just add another property called owner. And then here it would, instead of returning an int or a string or anything like that, we can actually return a pedantic model. So I can say, I want you to return a user. Whoops, a user, but it looks like we don't have a user class. We have user out, and then we have user create. So which one do we actually want to return? Probably user out, because that's what we're returning. The user create is for creating a user. And you notice that we get an error actually here. And that's because this user out hasn't been defined at this point in the code. So you have to read Python top down. And so user out is actually defined all the way down here. So if you wanted this to work, we would have to move all of the user stuff up a level. So I'm going to cut this and I'm going to just put it right above post. And so this should remove the error. And so now it looks like it's good. And so once again, all we did was we added a new property called owner, and this is going to return a pedantic model type called user out. And so that's all this is returning now. So let's see if this fixes our issue. And now I'm going to retrieve all posts. And so now take a look at this. It automatically fetched the owner. It got the ID, it got the email, it got when their account was created at. We may not want that, but for now, I think this makes sense. We could create another class to kind of narrow down the exact fields that we specifically wanted for this situation, but I think this is good enough. These are all the informations that I want actually returned. So this is perfect. It's going to do this for every post. And if I try to get one post, it's also going to return that specific owner. And so in reality, to get this functionality, right, once again, all we had to do was just create this relationship. And so once SQL Alchemy understands the relationship, it's going to fetch that piece of information for you from the user model. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at query parameters. And if you've never worked with an API, you may not know what that is, but I guarantee you, you have worked with them before and you have seen them. You just had no idea what they were. And so I'm on Yelp.com and I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes, but I'm just going to do a quick search here. I've just picked a random city. In this case, it's Miami. We're going to search for that. And I want you to take a look at the URL. And so our URL is, first of all, we have the domain name, which is kind of like the IP address. And then we have the specific endpoint that we want to reach. So this is the /search endpoint. And so in their API, they've set up, some sort of endpoint that probably is allows you to search for restaurants. And then we have a question mark. And I know you guys have seen this before because pretty much any website you've ever used, you'll see that question mark whenever you're searching for things. And any results you get, you'll see that in the URL. And so everything to the right of that is what's referred to as query parameters. So all of this is query parameters. And a query parameter is an optional key value pair that appears to the right of the question mark. And these query parameters allow us to kind of filter the results of a request. So, if we're trying to retrieve posts, maybe we don't want all posts. Maybe we want to get posts that were created in the last 2 hours. Maybe we want to get posts that, if it's a social media type app, maybe we want to get posts that have received over 100 likes, right? These are all things that you would do using query parameters where you can say, hey, you could just pass in a key and a pair, and you can say, I want to find posts, that are less than 2 hours old. And so a lot of other operations that are necessary in an API, things like pagination, those are all going to be done with query parameters. And if you take a look at this one, since we searched for Miami, right, it looks like it passed a query parameter called find_loc, which probably means location. And then it says Miami, Florida. And so it's going to basically talk to the API and say, hey, listen, I need you to get me all the restaurants, and I want you to filter down based off of restaurants in Miami. And so that's kind of how query parameters work. And so for us, it's up to us to define what query parameters we want to allow and what we want them to do. And it's going to vary from app to app. But you'll see that most APIs have a couple of query parameters that they all use. So let's go to our app real quick. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to our post router. And in this case, we've got our path operation of retrieving all posts. And what I want to do is I want to let the user be able to kind of filter down on the posts that they want to see. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to allow them to specify how many posts they want to retrieve altogether. So I want to give them the option to say, hey, I want 10 posts, or maybe I want 100 posts, or maybe I want 50 posts. We should allow the user to define that. And so to allow a query parameter, we could just go into our path operation function and just pass in another argument. So I'm going to do question mark. Then we give it the name of the query parameter. So this is the key essentially. And I'm going to call this limit. So this is going to limit the number of posts they get. And this is going to be of type int. And we're going to give it a default value. So we'll say that, by default, if they don't provide a limit, we're going to say the limit by default is 10. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to print out limit. All right. And I'll show you guys how to actually send that query parameter. So let's go to our get all posts. And so to send a query parameter, it's very easy. You just type in a question mark. Then you grab the name of the query parameter, which once again is limit. So we'll grab limit. And then you say you set it equal to whatever value you want it to be. So if I want to get a limit of 3, if I hit send, right, nothing should have changed in our code, but you can see that we were able to print out the limit. So that's how we access query parameters in Fast API. It's pretty simple. You just pass it in as another argument into your path operation function. But let's actually set up our query so that it now takes into account the limit. And with SQL Alchemy, anytime you want to, perform another operation, you usually have a built-in method. So I'm going to remove this .all for now. And so if I want to limit the number of results, I just do dot, and then let's see what methods we have at our disposal. Since we're looking for something that limits something, let's maybe check to see if there is a limit method. And looks like I don't see one here, but there actually is. We can do limit, and then here I'm just going to pass in the limit variable. And then after that, we can just do the .all as we usually do. All right, and so now, well, first of all, in our database, we don't actually have that many posts. So I'm just going to create a couple. Well, actually, I could just do this through our API a lot quicker. So I'm just going to create a whole bunch of posts. And so that should give us 5 posts. Well, let's create a few more. All right, so we've got 11 posts now. And we'll go back to our API and we'll say, I want a limit of 3. So let's send that. And let's see if we only get 3 posts. So we get 1, 2, 3. Perfect. And if I don't provide a limit, well, actually, let's try a different number. Let's try 5 now. All right, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. And if we don't provide a limit altogether, it should return 10 because our default was set to 10 posts, so limit of 10. And so we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there are 11 results, so there's one result that it didn't provide. So we've got the limit functionality down. What I want to do now is allow the user to skip results. So it grabbed, depending on however Postgres has decided to return 10 posts, it grabbed the first 10 based off of some criteria. And if we actually take a look at how it did, it looks like we got ID of 10, ID of 4. So it's kind of just all over the place. So it's probably not sorting based off of any specific field. We may want to specify that. But what we're going to do is I'm going to actually set the limit equal to 2. And so we'll get the first 2. However, Postgres determines what are the first 2 it should send, we get 2. But let's say we want to skip over a couple of them. Maybe we want to skip the first 2. Maybe we want to skip these 2. Well, I want to be able to send another query parameter called skip so that we can specify how many we want to skip. And if you want to send more than one query parameter, we just do the and keyword, and then we provide the next key value pair. So it would be like skip equals 2. And so just taking a look at the IDs here, we've got one with an ID of 10 and one with an ID of 4, and we want to skip both of those. So going back to our code, we're going to provide another path operation function, another argument into the function, and we'll call this skip. This is going to be of integer, and the default is going to be, let's say 0. We don't want to skip anything by default. And to add this to our query, we use the keyword offset. So we do offset. And then here I'm going to say offset equals skip. All right, and so we should be able to skip over both of these. And so if I provide a skip of 2, you can see it first starts out at 9 and then 11. If we do skip 0, right, it shouldn't skip any, right? 10 and then an ID of 4. If we skip 1, it should just skip the 10 and then start off on 4. And we can see that the first one is 4. So it allows us to skip over posts. And so that's ultimately how we're going to implement pagination on the front end, is because the front end should be able to skip based off of what page they're on. So if each page returns 20 results and you want to go to page 2, then you want to skip 20 results. If you want to go to page 3, you would skip 40 results. Now, the last query parameter I want to set up is a search functionality. I want the user to be able to search based off of some keywords in the title or maybe even the content, depending on how we want to implement searching. For now, we're just going to say we'll be able to search based off of the title. And the way that the search will work is we'll have another and we'll say search equals and then some random text. And so once again, we're going to provide another argument called search. And this is going to be of type string. However, this is, we can't exactly give a default search. So I'm going to say this is optional. It's going to be an optional string. So we don't have to provide this. And the default is just an empty quotes. And it looks like I have to import optional from Fast API or from typing. And so here I'll just say import optional. And this is going to give us an optional query parameter. And so what we're going to do here is I'll say filter. And to filter this, and just kind of like how we filtered based off of a specific user ID or a specific post ID, I can say models.post.title. And then we can use a method called contains. So we can say contains and then the search keyword. So this will allow us to provide some kind of string, and it'll just search for the entire title of a post, and it'll see if the search keywords are anywhere in the post title. It doesn't have to match completely. It just has to be somewhere in the post. So this will give us a little bit of flexibility so that we don't have to match the exact name of the post. We could just provide some keywords like hot dogs or beaches or whatever, and it should be able to just see if it's contained in there. So let's take a look at our database. You can see that we've got a lot of ones that say top beaches in Florida. So I'm just going to do a search. And if I just search for beaches, it should return all of these because they all contain the word beaches. And I'm just going to do a search, and I'll get rid of the limits and the skip for now. We don't really need that. And all of the results should be, actually, I don't think I saved it. Let me save that. And now if I do this, you can see that every result is going to have the word beaches in the title. And when it comes to query parameters, you can string as many as you want. So if you wanted the limit as well, and we'll set the limit to 2, and we can also provide a skip equals 1. You can add as many of the query parameters that you want. So now you can see that we set the limit to 2 and we skip the first one. Now, the last thing I want to show you guys is how to use spaces in your search query. Because right now we just have the word beaches, but let's say I wanted, just going into our Postgres database, let's see what I've got. Maybe I want to search for beaches, hello, or something beaches, right? How would I search for that in a URL? I can't put a space in the URL. I can't say, something beaches. So how do I do a space? Well, I can do % and 20, which is which means space in your URL. And then you can do beaches. So then just to verify that that's actually returning what we want, I'm going to do a print, and we're going to print out the search keyword. And we're going to test this out. So if I hit send, you can see that it returned the one result that has the word something and then beaches, but it doesn't return anything else. What I would like to do now is do a little bit of cleanup on our main.py file. You'll see that there's a lot of unnecessary imports that we don't need, especially since we moved all of our routes into their respective folders. So you'll see that a lot of these are grayed out. And so anything that's grayed out, we can move. But before we actually do that, what I actually want to do first is I want to take this code for connecting to our database using the regular Postgres driver. I'm going to move that to our database.py file. And keep in mind, we could just delete this because we're no longer using this, and we're using SQL Alchemy to actually connect to our database. So you can actually delete this. But just for documentation purposes, I'm actually going to just cut this out, and I'm going to move this into our database.py file, just so that you guys have this for reference in case you ever want to run raw SQL directly using this Postgres library instead of using SQL Alchemy. I want to make sure this course covers as many different possible situations for you guys. But moving this here, obviously we're going to get some errors because we have to import all of these. And I'm just going to go to our main and I'm going to import them from here. So here I'll just copy these two. And we'll actually just cut it out. And then it looks like we also need time. Where is that coming from? It's just coming from the time. Okay. All right, that should remove any errors. And we can just comment this out actually, because we're not going to use that anymore. And then going back to our main, you can see that both of these are grayed out. So we're not even importing anything from typing anymore, or we're not using anything from typing. So I'm going to remove that. You can see that we're no longer using status. So we're no longer using all of these. So I can remove all of those. And I'm not using the body here anymore. I'm not using anything from Pydantic. And I'm not using anything from random. We'll just get that a little bit closer. We're not using session anymore either. So I'll remove that. This, whatever that is, I'm going to remove that. And then we'll remove schemas and utils. We can remove getDB as well. And then obviously the posts array or list, that's no longer needed. These two functions, they're no longer needed. They were before we started working with databases. And then, we don't actually need this route anymore, but I'll just leave that in there. But you can see that our code is a lot cleaner now after removing all of those unnecessary imports. I'm just going to structure this a little bit better so all the code's a little bit closer together. And I think that's all the cleanup that we need to do for now. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't too much garbage building up in our application. When we first started working on databases, I mentioned that we should never hard code our database information or the database URL into our code, because this creates two issues. First of all, we're exposing our username and password right there in code. So anyone can see it. If we check it into GitHub, anyone who has access to it can see our password now. And at that point, we've compromised our application. But on top of that, the other big issue is that right now we've set this URL to go to our development Postgres instance, which is running on our local machine. When we actually deploy this to production, our Postgres server is not going to be running on this machine. It may not even be running on the machine that our application is actually deployed on. It could be on a completely different system. So we would need a way for the code to automatically update in a production environment to point to the actual production Postgres database instead of using the one that's hard-coded in here. And so we need a way to do that. And keep in mind, this isn't exclusive to just working with the databases. Any kind of confidential information, any passwords, secrets, anything that needs to get updated based off of the environment that it's in, needs a way, will run into this same exact issue. Right? And if we go to our OAuth2.file, you can see that we have our secret key hard-coded in here. This is something that we don't want to do. We don't want to expose this, and we need this to get updated between our development and our production environment because they may not be the same on both. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to make use of something called environment variables. And so an environment variable is just a variable that you configure on a computer. Doesn't matter what operating system, they all support it. And when you configure an environment variable on your computer, any application that's running on that computer will be able to access it. And that includes our Fast API. So your Python app will be able to access any environment variables on the machine. And so instead of hard coding the values in our code, what we'll say is, hey, retrieve an environment variable named whatever. Like we might have an environment variable called Postgres underscore URL, and that's going to contain the URL of our Postgres database. And so we don't need to hard code the actual value. We hard code just the name of the variable, and then Python will automatically pull in that variable. So let me show you guys how to do that. And I'm going to show you guys how to do this on Windows first, and then we'll take a look at this on a Mac or a Linux machine. Mac and Linux are the same steps. So I'm going to search for environment, and you'll see this edit the system environment variables. And what we want to do is we want to go to environment variables under the advanced tab. And here you'll see two sections. You've got system variables. This is going to be environment variables that are system wide, which means any user can access them. And then we have user specific variables. So these are variables that only I can access. And you can just kind of, go through these and just take a look at them. But you can see that we have an environment variable called path. Don't worry about what it's used for. This is something that gets set up when you install your machine. But we're going to take a look and try to access this. So you can see that this is the key, the variable name path, and then the value is some sort of path in our operating system or in our file system. So how do we actually access that? Well, let's open up a terminal. And here I'm just going to type in echo. And then we want to access an environment variable, just do % and then the name of the variable. So I'll say path with a capital P. And if I run this, you can see that it prints out that specific path. And so that's how you access an environment variable on the command line. With Python code, it's going to be a little bit different, but it's still pretty simple. I'm going to open up a new file just for demonstration purposes. You don't have to actually follow along on this. And to actually access a environment variable, we have to import the OS module. And then to access that variable, you say os dot get nv. And then within this method, you just pass in the name or the key of the variable. So in this case, it's path. And I'm just going to store this in a variable, and we can call this anything. I'll just call this path. Why not? And then I'll print out path so we can see if it actually works. But now if I do pi-3 and then run example.py, you can see that it printed out that same exact path. Now to set a new environment variable, we would go to new. And maybe I create a URL, a variable name called Postgres. Or we can just call this, how about my underscore DB underscore URL. So this is going to have the URL to access our database. So I'm going to say this is at localhost :5432. I think that's what our database is running on. And I'll hit OK. And so here we can see that this is our new environment variable that we created, my DB underscore URL, and it's set to localhost 5432. I'll hit OK. And then I'll hit OK here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try to access that variable. So I'll do echo my underscore DB underscore URL %. And actually it should be %%. And you can see that it does not print out what we said. It just prints out exactly what we wrote. So what gives? What happened here? Well, anytime you set a new environment variable, what you got to do is you got to close out your terminal and open up a brand new one. So I can close this out, or I can just open up a new one. And this new terminal, well, actually, I don't want a PowerShell. I want a command prompt. So this new terminal will be able to access newly created environment variables because they get set as soon as the terminal opens. So once the terminal's open, I can't change them. So I have to open up a new one so that it can reread and import all of those environment variables. So now if I do echo %my underscore DB underscore URL %, it looks like I may have mistyped this. So hold on, let me see what it's called. And that looks like it's correct. So what's happening? Well, I'm going to close out all of them. That's probably what's the issue. So let me open up a new terminal. And I'll open up a new command prompt. And now I'm going to try echo %my underscore DB underscore URL. And now we can see that we can read it. So we have to close out our terminals and open up a brand new one. It's kind of annoying, but that's just the way it works. Now, on top of that, there's an even bigger issue, and I think this is exclusive to Windows. And that is that VS Code, the terminals here, it's whenever you set a new environment variable, they never have access to it. So you could try deleting all of these terminals and then creating a new terminal and then accessing that new environment variable, mydb_URL. And if I try to